So there is this short docu-series on Charlie Sheen's life on Netflix. I grew up with Two and a Half Men, amazing TV series, very, very funny. And it was interesting to see the behind the scenes in his life, in his personal life, how damage he was able to take because of his drug addiction, and at the same time, his seemingly okay life on the screen. And this clip is about addiction, because I want to make an interesting parallel here. It's not about the typical kind of addictions that, you know, are recognized in the society and there are rehab centers for. I want to talk more about the addiction in terms of first principles thinking, because I see an interesting pattern there. And because I saw yesterday this movie, I thought, okay, it's interesting how things get under your skin in a way, and how things then start to become more and more abusive, right? When it comes down to being addicted to something, to a behavior, to a drug. So there are some components when it comes down to addiction. First of all, I would like to start with the definition of Andrew Huberman on addiction, which is something very easy to remember and nice to articulate in terms of, you know, impact, which is addiction is a progressive narrowing of things that bring you pleasure. A progressive narrowing of things that bring you pleasure. Which is very interesting because it points at addiction being a vicious cycle, right? If it's a progressive narrowing, it means that it was not so narrow at the beginning, but the more you indulge, the more narrow it becomes, which means that you don't get to dictate the terms of the relationship with that substance anymore. You get to be hooked by it, and it tells you how you should behave and what you should do in order to engage and consume and feed this cycle, right? If it's a progressive narrowing, it means that things in general don't bring you pleasure anymore, and you have to indulge in that substance, in that drug of choice, in order to get some pleasure out of life. And there are other components of addiction that I think are worth mentioning in terms of them relating to the typical topics that I discuss in these videos, right? So what I would consider to be part of an addiction and an addiction cycle is the compulsivity, right? You cannot not do that thing. You cannot not consume that thing, whatever it is. There is this also abusive relationship, which links to compulsivity in a way. So the fact that you cannot dictate the terms of the relationship and you have lower and lower control over indulging, you know, or not in that thing, it's also indicative of an addiction. And let's talk now about things which are not normally regarded as being addictions. Eating, for example. Because we do it so often, because we eat all the time, no one thinks at eating or as indulging in food as an addiction as such. Binge eating and compulsive eating related disorders are treated by what Peter Attia calls medicine 2.0 in a reactive way. So first you have to develop some sort of medical condition, typically downstream of a dysregulated relationship with food. So you eat either too much or bad quality, or typically, you know, too much and bad quality over a long enough period of time, and then you develop metabolic disease, you become obese, you have all sorts of problems because the body cannot accommodate that volume of food, and also the nature of the food itself, right? When you overindulge, when you consume over your necessary daily caloric intake, then that becomes, the food itself becomes really like a poison in time, right? So we are talking about years. But because it happens so slowly, and because we all eat, we don't think of food as being an addiction. At the same time, because food can also respond to this criteria when it comes down to addiction, which is compulsivity, like abusive relationship, like the food controls us. So we don't have control anymore, right? When this urge of I have to eat now comes and you cannot not eat, it means that you are dependent on it. It means that you don't dictate the terms anymore, right? But it's so natural, it seems like it's so natural to not have control over when to eat and what to eat, that we don't think of it as an addiction, but it is, in my opinion. And I say it is because I proved it to myself first. I lived for the most part of my life in this abusive relationship with food, in the sense that when I was hungry, I was not functioning anymore that well, right? I had the urge to eat, and I had to eat now because otherwise I was not able to be a pleasant presence for people around me. Work, like, continue to develop some functional abilities to engage in work or whatever I was doing. I felt always like this urge to eat, and that became primary concern when that happened, right? And it typically happened, of course, around the clock, like for most people. Like I had this urge to eat in the morning around 9 or 10 a.m. And if I was able to somehow bypass that feeling, then of course I had to give in maximum 1 p.m., right? I mean, I have to eat lunch. If I skipped breakfast, I have to eat lunch now. I cannot not eat lunch. And this predictive pattern also influenced how I was thinking about food itself and how I started to tolerate this behavior as being normal, right? So I thought that this is a normal thing, that the fact that I cannot continue to do work, for example, because I feel hungry, it's not a problem. It happens to everyone. So I need to eat first in order to be able to function. And you hear people talk about this so casually, like it's absolutely normality, right? I have to eat because otherwise, I cannot function. You cannot, you cannot have anything. You cannot talk to me anymore because I have to eat. Okay, and I took that to be the normal case, right? Everyone is doing it. Everyone has this need to eat at this moment in time, otherwise they cannot function. And my wife and my friends, they are witnesses for me transforming. There is this, there is also this commercial at Sneakers. It says like, you are not you when you're hungry, and it compares like an angry person with some sort of a wild animal or something. And the funny thing is, of course, that in order to apparently get rid of that state, you should take a Snickers, which does nothing but reinforce the same kind of behavior ultimately, which is just kind of funny in terms of message. But the key point here is that we meet the criteria of abusive relationship, of an addiction when it comes down to food as well, right? So compulsivity, I feel the urge to eat. Because I feel the urge to eat, I cannot eat anymore on my own terms. I cannot postpone eating. So the food controls me. I then learned with years that the type of food that I was eating is also dictating my relationship with food itself, because the urges are different, right? If you eat junk food versus if you eat organic food, you don't feel the same kind of urge. Also in terms of macronutrients, if you have a rich nutrient-rich food, rich in protein and healthy fats, and you maybe eat some fruit at the end instead of just binging croissants all day long, it's a different kind of urge. So in one way, the relationship with food can be more abusive, for some people than for others, depending on what they eat as well. But this is part of an education process that can take years. And today we don't have this societal apparatus, if you want, to educate everyone in a way that anticipates the kind of diseases that happen at the end of their life or in their midlife when they become obese, or when all sorts of metabolic diseases link to this abusive relationship with food downstream of it, right? So now, a very interesting point that I realized, long time ago, but yesterday when I saw this movie with Charlie Sheen, and today when I remembered it, I made this connection when it comes down to addiction, to thinking itself. And I think this is the most pervasive and under the radar addiction that we absolutely all have, right? Thinking itself. And it's so sneaky. The thinking as an addiction is so sneaky because we all do it all the time. It's not like eating, right? When we have these intermittent patterns, right? So we eat 2 times a day, 3 times a day, sometimes more, sometimes less. We get to dictate a bit the terms in terms of, okay, I eat now, then I eat tomorrow, or I fast for 3 days, which is like a huge breakthrough. It was a huge breakthrough for me to see that I can stay multiple days without eating and I won't die. And then, okay, but at least you have this gap, right? You can create this gap. In thinking, when it comes down to thinking, you cannot really create this gap, because thinking is such a pervasive thing that we don't take it to be negotiable. In the sense that when it comes down to the 3 criteria that I think about with an addiction, with a possible addiction, like compulsive, abusive, and no control, thinking itself matches all these 3, if you think about it, pun intended. So most people go through life not realizing, me included, by the way. It's not some pejorative thing that I'm saying, because I'm still struggling with this in a way. A struggle is not a good word, because it's not a battle for me. It's just more of a contemplation these days. I'm just thinking at the fact that, thinking happens for most of us. Yes, we can think of stuff from time to time, like, we can direct our thinking towards a certain process. In terms of analytical thinking, we want to solve this. But more of the time, thinking happens to us. We get some sort of a thought, which we didn't call for, right? And typically the kinds of thoughts that just hit us without us calling for them are thoughts which are not necessarily constructive in themselves. They are not leading to a positive results in our lives. They are part of the so-called default mode network of the mind, in which we think about ourselves and potential issues that might happen, So we start to indulge in this thinking, which, because of its nature, doesn't lead to anything productive, right? So, for example, when it comes down to compulsivity, first of all, most of us don't even realize that there is a possibility to not think. So, for example, the easiest example is when you sleep. Making abstraction of the REM stage of the sleep, when you have dreams, and potentially you could say, okay, I'm thinking in my dreams, okay? But when you're not conscious at all about the parts of your sleep, when you're not conscious of you being asleep, you're not thinking there, right? So you can exist in this life without thinking. For people who rely on thinking for a living, let's say, me included, it's important to realize that it was important for me to realize that I am not my thoughts, and I am not my own thinking. And I cannot always identify myself and who I am as a human being with my cognitive abilities and the thinking processes that go in my head. So what's interesting about thinking as well is that it reinforces all the other addictions that we have or we can develop in life. And let's put aside the typical addictions or addictive behaviors. Let's go back to food. People don't get obese or sick from over consuming food because they have the ability to control either the food or their thoughts. They cannot control either. And of course, the vicious cycle here is that I am eating something, I'm overindulging. Typically, you overindulge on things that make you sick and have this ability to let you overindulge in them, like fast food and foods where you don't have a clear nutrient split for the organism to recognize very easily, right? So you bombard the food with a lot of ingredients which hide the ability to easily identify what this food is about, how many calories it has, to trigger this kind of satiety sensors in the organism. So we overindulge. And we know that we overindulge, right? Because we look at ourselves. We know that we are not okay. We know that we are overweight. We know that we don't feel good as a general state of being after we eat a lot. But then what we do? Then what we do is like we think about what we just did, like overindulging, like the typical addictive behavior. You overindulge, then you feel bad about it. And when you feel bad about it, you start to think thoughts, which of course are not happy thoughts, right? You will not start to think about, oh, I ate 2 burgers, I'm already obese, I already have these, diseases, but I'm quite happy that I did that, right? Let's pat myself on the back. No one says that. But at the same time, no one wants to feel that way for, a long period of time. So the thoughts that appear as a consequence of this abusive relationship with food are thoughts which cause us pain, right? And in order to alleviate that pain, in order not to feel that bad about ourselves, what do? We consume the drug of choice, right? A compulsive, a predictive narrowing, no, predictive, how is it? A progressive narrowing of things that bring you pleasure. So because we have this safe exit when it comes down to feeling good, which is food, when we think bad, when we don't feel good about what we did, we go and eat more because for a brief moment we know that eating will alleviate how we feel about eating bad, right? So there is this incredible vicious cycle that never ends. So we eat something, so we feel good about the fact that we feel bad about eating, right? So it's a crazy thing, but you cannot get out of it because you don't know how, right? You don't have the instruments, and the mind takes control over you. So basically, the thoughts that you can generate at the end of a compulsive disorder, right, which is caused by an addiction, they are the kind of thoughts that just fuel that addiction more and more. And that's what's sneaky about thinking itself as an addiction. Because if you don't realize that those thoughts are generated as a consequence of your body craving the drug of choice, in this case food, then you take your thoughts to be reality. And sometimes you want to run away from them, right? And then you indulge. So for a brief moment of time, you don't think about that thing anymore, or you alleviate the pain of having to think about you not being a good person or feeling bad about yourself or so on, you then indulge. So how to break this vicious cycle? I think that's the key, and it was the key for me when it comes down to food. And food itself for me was a big one, because first of all, I didn't know that this relationship I have with food was abusive, right? I took it for granted like everyone else. I feel this urge to eat, and because I was eating crap, basically, I felt this urge to eat all the time, even when I didn't really need to eat in terms of calories intake in the day. And when I said, okay, this is not okay, I started to want to dictate the terms with the relationship that I have with food. I knew that I will still have to consume food for the rest of my life. So it's not like, okay, it's not like alcohol or drugs or anything else where you can say, okay, I don't do that anymore, right? Because this is dangerous for me. I cannot consume anymore. So you cannot do that with food. So you have to disengage from this aggressive or abusive relationship and take back control over your consumption, right? So it's not the food consuming you, it's you consuming the food. And again, thinking here, the thoughts that we can generate, they can start to support this new endeavor, if you want. So again, thoughts are the fuel that compounds an addictive behavior in time. But because thoughts are there all the time, if we don't take control over them as well, typically they tend to derail on the basis of an unhealthy body, for example, right? If we become unhealthy as a byproduct of not eating well, then the thoughts that we generate with our mind cannot be healthy thoughts, because they are generated by a brain which is also suffering, right? The brain is an organ which is in a body which is, getting sick. So how can we expect that the thoughts generated by a mind which, is a byproduct of an organ, to be good and productive thoughts? So when I first started to take back control over my relationship with food, I realized that I don't have to give in to the thoughts that I carried with me for 30 years, which told me that I have to eat now. I saw that if I can skip one meal, nothing will happen. I can even skip a whole day and nothing will happen. Yes, at the beginning it was difficult. I had like a huge headache when I didn't eat lunch in one day. And I remember vividly, I was on the highway on my way back from work. It was around 7 p.m. and I didn't eat anything in that day. And I had like a huge headache. And we went to an Indian restaurant and we had like rice, curry, something. And the moment I took the first bite of rice, my headache went away just like that. And I was like, wow, amazing. So I was running low on sugar and my body said, man, you have to eat some sugar because we are not doing well, right? So do something about it. And then I started to learn about metabolic flexibility and that the body can generate ketones, which is an alternative fuel to glucose. And actually it's more efficient in terms of fuel, and you can actually stay without glucose in your body because the body will anyway produce glucose because the brain needs it. And I started to see, okay, can I maybe stay 2 days without eating? And I saw that I was able to do it and I didn't die, right? And then I stayed 3 days and then 4 days. I think the longest fast that I had was 4 days. And not only that I was able to continue to survive, but I was also feeling great. In the second day, started with the second day, when the glucose started to get depleted, I was able to switch to ketones for my energy production, and my brain started to work in an interesting way, right? So I was more clear, more articulate. My sensations, and my senses got more sensitive, right, in terms of me being able to parse the universe around me. And it was very interesting. And those experiments helped me see that food doesn't have to be this thing which forces me to indulge in, right? Food is in this food, if it becomes abusive, it can also be considered a drug, in my opinion. But because now I dictate the terms with food, and I eat when I want, what I want, how much I want, then I'm in control. It's not abusive anymore. I don't eat because I have this compulsion to eat. I eat on my own terms. If I want to eat more than I would normally eat, for example, I have one day in which I want to eat 3 croissants. I do it because I want to do it. I don't feel bad about myself after that because I planned it in a way, right? If I eat 2 portions of a meal that I enjoy from time to time, I eat it on my own terms because I know how much I eat. I know what's the impact of that meal on my health, on my weight. How can I um, um, how can I deconstruct the different meals in a week so that I maintain my health and my body weight, how I split the nutrients, how many grams of protein I take per meal, how can I split them between the days, from which sources I mean, basically the fact that now I have this relationship with food in which I dictate the terms ultimately makes me free and keeps me in a state where I don't feel afraid of being exposed to sweets or desserts, or there is a lot of chocolate around here. Please take it away from me because I will eat it. I will eat it all. I will eat all of it. I'm not in that place, and there are stages in it, right? At the beginning, when you start to make baby steps towards disrupting this abusive relationship, of course, you cannot just be surrounded by chocolate, right? You have to create an environment which is conducive to you making the better decisions along the way and developing better habits. But with time, the more you get control over that thing, the more you don't have to be isolated from it, right? And that happens with everything. There are people who, consumed alcohol for their whole life, and then they said, okay, stop. And then at some point, they can maybe drink 1 glass of wine once a week, or maybe 2 glasses of wine once a week, or I don't know. But I'm saying that even the fact that you are afraid of it, for me, it's still some sort of abusive relationship, right? If I would be scared or afraid of having chocolate around me, I would still not feel in control because I would always fear that I might indulge, that the chocolate might control me. And that's not a good relationship I want to be in either, right? So it's one thing to be able to not eat because I create the environment around me so that I don't indulge. And it's another level of taking back control when you can be surrounded by your substance of choice when it comes down to addiction and not indulge in it because it's just something that you don't want to do anymore, right? So when it comes down to thinking now, which is this fuel that either helps us with disrupting this abusive relationship or amplifies it. How can we get rid of this addiction to thinking, right? Is it even possible? Well, I would say yes. So if we respect the terms of the addiction itself, compulsive, abusive, with no control over it, I would say that we can do the same thing with thinking, for sure. First of all, the first thing, I think also when it comes down to any kind of addiction, and that applies to thinking as well, is to become aware of it, to become aware we have a problem. So with food, we can become aware we have a problem. Other people tell us, right, look, you're just eating maybe too much, or maybe can you make better, healthy choices or whatever. But when it comes down to thinking, no one will tell you, man, you're just thinking the wrong ways. Or people can tell us if they see that we are worrying a lot and so on. But at the same time, everyone is doing it, right? It's the kind of advice that you might say to some person, but you do it as well. So it doesn't really apply necessarily. So disrupting this abusive relationship to thinking, or being thought by your mind, I think it comes down to, first of all, being aware of it happening to you, right? Thinking happens to you, happens to us for most part of the day. Again, there are thoughts that pop in our mind without necessarily wanting them to be there. And then they dictate what we do in a way, right? Thoughts are precursors to action and emotions. I would say that thoughts are precursors to emotion, to us feeling something. And then based on what we feel, we typically engage in some sort of an action. So when we think about an outcome, we start to have some sort of an emotional relationship towards it. And based on that, we take some sort of an action in the direction of achieving or avoiding that outcome. Now, if thinking happens to us, if we have no control over it, then we don't have this liberty of choice, of freedom of choice. We cannot do that anymore because we are being thought by our minds. We are not thinking it, right? So how I like to think about thinking itself is that it's a tool. So thoughts, or the mind itself, is an incredible tool that I want to deploy at my will. So I have a task at work. I have to engage my mind into solving that problem or complete that task. But it's a finite period of time in which I just deploy my thinking, right? I am actively engaged in that thing and I'm consciously doing it, right? So the key term here is conscious. I am consciously aware that I'm thinking thoughts which help me solve this problem. Now, when thinking happens to me and I don't choose to think typically negative things, right? Because if we were to think happy thoughts, we would not be bothered by that, right? But when I say thinking happens to us, there are typical worries, anxiety about potential future things that might happen, or recollection of bad things that happen to us, or we classify them as being bad, right? So either overindulge in retrospective analysis of events that we would have rather avoided, or project ourselves into the future, into unwanted scenarios. So the thoughts that we generate in these two contexts are meant to help us avoid basically the future outcome based on the lessons that we learned from the past. The problem with this pattern is that it's again a vicious cycle. It forces us to live everywhere else but in this single moment of time which never ends, right? Which is this moment. This timeless, ever-present, ever-changing moment where life happens. This is life. Life is not in the future, life is not tomorrow, life is not yesterday, life is today, and only today. The fact that we can produce thoughts about things that will most probably happen to a certain degree of likelihood tomorrow or in 1 week or in 1 month makes us think that this is reality, that this is life. I know that I will go there next week. How can you tell me that this will not happen? Well, you have zero control over anything happening next week, right? The fact that in your life you accumulated enough proof in terms of predicting what will happen next week and making plans about what you will do next week, and those plans getting to fruition, tricks your brain into thinking that you have control over the next week. But in reality, you don't. So what's tricky, what's sneaky again about thinking is that planning about the future is absolutely necessary, right? To live in a modern society. You have plans, and in our family, my wife takes care of the planning more than I do, as you can imagine. I like more to philosophize about things, but and strategize and think about the future in a way that is not necessarily anchored in which is an interesting paradox now that I'm thinking about it. So I'm strategizing, I'm thinking about the future, but in a way which is forcing me somehow to live in the present. It's interesting. And my wife, on the contrary, she's planning for the future, she's organizing the future, which takes her into the future completely. And she's not necessarily living in the present, but in the plans that she takes for granted as such. So she creates the plans. Of course, 99% of the time, those plans come to fruition, and we need those plans in order to live, an organized life as a family. At the same time, I recognize that those plans only exist in her mind, right? All the plans that everyone has about what will happen tomorrow, in 1 week, in 1 year, they only live in our minds. They are not real as such. But we take them for being real. We take them for reality. So this compulsive thinking, if first of all we become aware of it, we disengage from this abusive pattern, right? We realize that this thinking, this projection in the future is actually on the back of some sort of a biological programming that you have to anticipate what comes next, right? You cannot simply just stay and enjoy what you have now and enjoy the present and the surroundings, even if this is the only thing that really exists as such. The mind forces us to think in the future because we can anticipate what comes. We can prepare our existence for what's next, right? We can anticipate, we can prepare. The problem is, of course, that the mind, because it controls us and it forces us to think those thoughts, we have zero control over the thoughts themselves. Worrying, anxiety, projection in the future, recollecting the past, they don't allow us to live in the present moment where thinking is optional. And I think that's the core problem of it. That's the problem I have with thinking as an abusive relationship in the end, right? Thinking is a byproduct of the mind. For what we can say, we are the only species who can think. Maybe at least, at this level of, advanced ability in terms of, rational thinking, projecting in the future, planning and so on, even if, of course, because other animals don't have language that we can understand, we cannot really say if they are thinking or not. But clearly thinking is a byproduct of the mind, which is a byproduct of an evolved brain, in my opinion. So our brains as a species are evolved to a point where they create this ability to anticipate what comes next, to reflect on the past. And this is the thinking that we all do, right? And it's normal for everyone. We never think of thinking itself as being abusive, right? Or as being an addiction, but it is. Everything that you cannot disengage from is an addiction. When you have the compulsion to think or to eat or to do whatever on a recurring basis, that thing is abusing you. That's an addiction. So again, because we can also live without thinking, like we can exist without thinking, it means that thinking is optional. People fear that if they don't think, they are not intelligent anymore, or they are losing their grip on things and they are not producing, right, anything, which is not the case. The fact that you can at least observe your thoughts as being not generated by you consciously, in my opinion, is the first step to real freedom that we all crave ultimately in this life. We crave freedom of thinking, in my opinion. Because if you have freedom from thinking and you can use thinking as a tool that you can deploy towards solving specific problems in your life and not think automatically that everything in your life is a problem because it's there, because it's attached to some sort of a thinking pattern, that's for me freedom. When a thought comes into my mind about something that I need to solve and I didn't address yet, and I realized that this thought appeared without me calling for it while I was spending time with my child, and look at it for what it is, just an ephemeral temporary appearance in my mind that I didn't call for, I can say, yeah, I don't need to look at you right now. I will not give in to the temptation of starting to worry and think about the thing that I didn't do while I'm engaging and playing with my child. And because I can have that control, I can say now, okay, interesting, it means this is interesting, it pops in my mind, but let's put it on the side now. Now I'm just playing with my child where I don't have to think that much. I'm just assembling a Lego piece, or I'm just, I don't know, putting tattoos on my arms or whatever, right? And I think this is ultimately for me real power and real freedom. If you think about it, your mind is the only thing that you take with you all the time, and you cannot get a break from it. No matter if you are in holidays in Bali or you are just at work, you take your mind with you, and you take the good thoughts and the bad thoughts with you. For the most part, the bad thoughts are not controlled by you. You are controlled by them. I don't think anyone thinks consciously or wants consciously to think bad thoughts. I think bad thoughts, which typically we translate into worries and anxiety about the future, about a potential negative thing that might happen, this is so-called normal behavior of the mind. And because everyone does it, we don't look at it as being a maladaptive way of using our minds. We don't think at thinking as an addiction, right? We don't, but again, if it's compulsive, if it's abusive, if you have thoughts that don't let you live your best life, and those thoughts are not conducive to a positive, productive outcome in your life, then those thoughts are not useful. They are abusive. You are being thought. You are not thinking, you are being thought. Thinking happens to you. And that's the last frontier for me, right? Because we interpret reality and the world and everything around us through thinking. So if you take control over how you think, what you think, why you think, like you can take control over your food, what you eat, when you eat, why you eat, how much you eat, right? If you take control over your thinking in the same way, how much I think, why I think like that, right? When I want to think, when I don't want to think, then you can just do whatever you want, because you get very efficient with thinking as a tool. You don't get tired anymore. You use thoughts in a productive way to accomplish your goals. And when you don't need thinking, when you need to play with your loved ones, or when you need to just sit in the queue at a supermarket, you don't have to think about anything. You just stay there and you are present with your body, and you feel your body from the inside, and you observe the world around you, and you become curious about the sounds that you hear, or about the smells, or I don't know, about your experience as a human being besides thinking. You become aware of the silence. You become aware of what's the background of all the noise that you hear all the time. right? There is something there. How can you listen to silence? How can you not be drawn into the sounds that you hear all the time around you and be actually interested in that which enables the sound to exist in the first place? Did you ever thought about that? Did you ever think about that? Sorry. No, because no one teaches us to do it, right? We are so mesmerized about everything that happens around us that we are being caught in this endless play of things, like in a carnival, right, where you are just overstimulated with things happening all around you that you cannot see anything beyond that. But again, this is for me real freedom, when you can go beyond thinking and you can recognize the mind as simply a tool that you can deploy to achieve something productive. And when you don't need to think, you don't think. When you need to do it, you do it. But it's again your own, right? It's your own decision when to do it. It's my decision when I eat, what I eat, why I'm eating that and not something else. It's my decision when I think something. It's my ability to realize that I'm thinking things that I don't want to think and do something about it. So don't get misled by thinking as being something normal and abusive, and anxiety being your normality simply because everyone else is anxious. Claim back this incredible power, because everything in your life is shaped by how you think about it. You yourself as a human being, how you perceive yourself to be in your relationship to others and in relationship to yourself, how the world appears to you, you create it through thoughts and language which you create internally in your mind. Everything is linked to that. So if you can realize how thinking happens to you and that you cannot generate thinking by on your own terms, then you are being thought, you are not thinking, right? And this is the first step. Be aware of it. Be aware of it happening, and be aware of it enabling everything else in life that you want to get rid of. All the other abusive relationships you have with other substances or behaviors, see how they are fueled by thoughts. And because you want to alleviate those thoughts, you indulge more in that addiction, and how they feed off each other. And if you can break the cycle, first of all, identify that your thinking causes ultimately you to indulge again, so you can alleviate the bad emotions and the feelings that are generated by those negative thoughts. Then you can break the cycle. You can see that, okay, it's my thoughts which generate this kind of internal tension that I feel the need now to alleviate with food, for example. And when you see that, you realize that you have control. And then your life starts to take a different kind of shape and have many more colors in it. I wish you good luck, and keep me posted with the progress.